Welcome to our global audience to the getAbstract Expert webinar, Continuing Your Jedi Growth. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited to talk to Dr. Tiffany Jana, who is a non-binary awareness artist and pleasure activist. They use their work and art to create a loving embrace of people and culture that emphasizes liberation through joy. And that just sounds awesome to my ears. I don't know what you think. Dr. Jana is the founder and CEO of TMI Consulting, Inc., a global diversity, equity, and inclusion management consulting firm, and the world's first certified benefit corporation with a diversity and inclusion focus. So welcome, Dr. Jana. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. When it comes to personal and professional relationships, those are 4 of the ingredients which are crucial to happiness and success. Your mission is helping people see and accept that they make mistakes while trying to do better. And in that sense, you help people grow interpersonally. So thank you very much for being here today and embarking on that journey with our audience and also with myself. Thank you.
Oh, thank
Dr.
you.
Jana, let's dive right in with a short introduction to the topic. What are actually subtle acts of exclusion?
Subtle acts of exclusion, it's right there in the name. So they are actions, behaviors, words. They tend to be subtle. So if I just punch you in the face, that's not subtle. That's really overt. So subtle is like a benign comment, something that you just might miss if you didn't know what you were looking for or if you weren't on the receiving end of it. And then acts of exclusion just means that they are behaviors or words or ideas that just push people a little bit out to the margins. So if I tell you, I love you, you're an amazing person, you did a great job, I'm bringing you in, I'm creating an embrace. But if I say, oh my gosh, what is that on your head? That's pushing me away. That's saying you're not normal. Like, I don't like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And can you give us another example of a subtle act of exclusion that others who are being excluded might really miss or just not see?
Yeah, so a common one that you see we'll have to do like with gender roles. So we'll see things like in organizations and institutions where masculinity has been normalized. When you have an event or you have a big meeting or something, sometimes people are going to assume that the women are going to clean up or that the women are going to get coffee, even if that's not their job, because the assumption is that women are more nurturing, maybe, and that traditionally women are the ones that clean up and get the coffee. But when that assumption is made and it's just, oh, Kathy, you go get the coffee, please. Could you refill the pot? But Kathy might be an executive and not somebody whose job that actually is. That can feel like an act of exclusion.
Okay, get it. And what's exactly the connection between subtle acts of exclusion and unconscious bias?
So the nature of the subtle act of exclusion is that it tends to be based in some kind in societal biases, in biases that either we know we have or even we don't know we have. So very often, just heard it the other day in a meeting where people were talking about all of the technological integration, and someone just kind of subtly made the assumption that an older person would know less about the technology and how to fix a problem, when that's a stereotype, that's a bias, that if you're of a certain generation, maybe you're not tech savvy. You can't make that assumption. So the unconscious bias tends to be the overlap where, a subtle act of exclusion, if it's based in unconscious bias, you don't even know you're doing it, right? So it's not like I'm a person who can tell you that I just don't like robots, and whenever I see a robot, I'm making an ugly face and I'm going to make a bad assumption. It can be, I don't even realize I have a bias against robots, and every time they're in the room, I just turn my back. I don't listen to what they have to say. So where the overlap is, if you have an unconscious bias, sometimes the places where you engage in a subtle act of exclusion are right along those threads. And that's why we have to listen when people tell us, you know what, Tiffany, I've just noticed in that meeting that you didn't use this person's pronouns properly, or whatever it is. Listen to the criticism that you get, because you're probably not doing it on purpose, and you're probably not even realizing that you're doing it.
If it's not on purpose, it actually happens a lot, I guess.
Yes, all the time. We
Yeah.
are injuring each other on a pretty daily. I mean, if you're interacting with different people, you're probably injuring folks on a daily basis. And I'm the first to say the world has decided that I'm some kind of diversity expert, and I mess up all the time. I mess up all the time. I get my own pronouns wrong, much less other people's. But that's
I
what
want to get to that later.
yeah.
I'm looking for a personal story later, but let me ask another question first.
Okay.
Some scholars have suggested that top-down measures to debiasing organizations is more effective than trying to change individual mindsets. So, for example, there are debiasing job descriptions, or people are proactively including people with diverse thinking in like every decision-making process. Where do you stand on this debate?
Honestly, I feel like it's a little bit of a both and. The top-down piece is necessary. Like I think one of my books is Erasing Institutional Bias. You want to look at how the systems and the structures and the policies and the procedures might be leaving people behind, because you can change all the mindsets in the world. And if your systems and structures keep excluding people, you're not going to get very far. So the institutional piece is important. And then if leadership is not engaged and bought in and having a full, like, fluent understanding of what this all means and what the implications are for work, then when violations happen or when things go wrong or it gets off the rails, there will be no accountability. So you've got to have the structural, you've got to have the leadership buy-in. And then as far as, individual mindset change, it's so interesting because on the one hand, people want to remove the bias from people so that we can get our jobs done and we can help our customers. But the reality is, as employers, we don't have any right to tell people what to think and believe. And so this work gets, and this is why we're seeing a lot of angst about things like critical race theory, because people are like, oh, you're going to change my mind. No, we don't have the right as employers to tell you what to think or what to believe, but we do have a responsibility to tell you what is acceptable behavior in the workplace. So it's not about what you think and believe. If hearts and minds are changed through my work, I'm very happy. That's exciting. But the first thing is, let me just tell you how you can interact with me as a Black non-binary person in ways that are respectful. And as an employer, it's my job to protect my employees. So I want people to know those behaviors, which ones I expect and which ones will be dealt with accordingly.
Okay, yeah, that makes so much sense. And what can organizations do exactly to make people more sensitive to their capacity for bias?
So this is why my first book was Overcoming Bias, because I love unconscious bias as an entry point, because it lets everybody off the hook. It says, hello, are you human? Welcome to humanity. We are all biased. It's just the reality of how we live and work. But many of us aspire to be better people. A lot of us don't want to hurt people. And the minute somebody says to us, oh, hey, by the way, good person, are you aware of the fact that on a pretty continual basis, you're actually hurting the people around you without meaning to? As soon as we hear that, we should have a sense of personal responsibility and say, oh my gosh, like I actually have judgment for people who treat people badly. And now you're saying that I might be doing it by accident. Please share with me how I'm doing that and teach me how to be better. But it requires effort. So letting people off the hook by saying this is part of being human, and then saying, oh, but we have a responsibility to do the best by each other that we can. So we normalize the reality of unconscious bias, and then we provide the skills to lift everybody up.
Yeah. I could imagine at first it comes as a shock when you hear that you just did something wrong, but yeah, normalizing sounds like a good thing to do. So at that point, I want to address a very personal question from our audience, thanks to the person who sent that in. I am a minority who's in a leadership position, and the current culture at our company makes me feel that I am powerless. What are some ways that I can increase my influence at work where there is a perceived lack of power?
So perceived lack of power. It's interesting that you ended with that, right? Because we want to make sure that perception is not reality. And so this is where I write about this pretty extensively on medium.com. And it's really important that there be clarity around your job role, your responsibilities, what you're here to accomplish. And if you can get, and I don't know how long ago it was you were hired, sometimes you get hired and then the job changes over time. That's pretty normal. But it's important for you to get a face-to-face with whoever you report to and get absolute clarity on what it is that you're here to do and sort of what the parameters of that are. Because if you are allowing yourself to be constrained based on assumptions you're making about what you can do, that's very different than the power structure telling you you absolutely cannot do it. So get clarity on your role. And then once you have that clarity, if you're asserting yourself and trying to do your job and you're coming up against obstacles, at that point, either you have to speak up or you go to someone that you trust in the organization who can do an end run around to the right people and say, hey, you know, we hired, you know, so-and-so to do such and such, and they're, you know, I'm not really seeing them getting the opportunity to do that. So advocate for yourself if you can, get clarity on that role. And when you're getting the pushback after you have clarity, you've got to hold them accountable. Somebody has to hold them accountable, either you or a trusted advisor who's in that system.
Yeah, this is super good advice, very helpful. Diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings do not automatically lead to behavioral change, do they? No. What do you think is the most important thing to work on for companies to create a more inclusive workplace then?
So I talk about something I call container theory. A lot of times, so the training by itself doesn't work. That whatever it is that we're trying to train on, it has to be kind of continually reinforced. So you have to have opportunities to practice. You have to have invitations to, you know, engage in whatever are the skills, whatever are the things that you're trying to learn. We can't have diversity training and then never talk about diversity in meetings. There should be, you know, a diversity committee that every time we have an all staff meeting, there should be something that we lift up and say, okay, here's what we're doing to create more inclusion. But in my mind, the container theory, the first thing is making sure that the organization, the container, the culture is strong enough to be able to manage what happens when you either add diversity or you empower people with these ideas. Because if you're doing it right, things get uncomfortable. Right after you start doing that, if you're doing it right, then people get uncomfortable, situations get uncomfortable, people feel empowered to say, oh yeah, by the way, I really don't like it when people don't use my pronouns right. Or by the way, you know, I was promised this and this, and I really feel like I'm watching my other colleagues who look different from me get more opportunities. So if you're going to embark on it, you cannot be afraid of what's going to happen if you're actually doing it well. And so where things fall apart is you start with the training, the conversations start happening, there starts to be a little bit of accountability and people get uncomfortable, and then everybody wants to jump ship. They want to leave, they want to stop. And that's the worst thing you can do, because now you've lost trust. Now no one will ever believe you when you say, oh no, we're going to focus on diversity, we're going to create more inclusion. So you've got to be accountable and you've got to be consistent. Like, keep doing it, even if it's just a little bit. Doing a little bit of something every once in a while on a steady course is better than we have a diversity training and then we don't do anything for 3 years.
Yeah, I get that. If you make
That's actually
promises and when you get expectations high and there's nothing coming, I can imagine, yeah.
And if you're a person who feels affected by these concepts, so if you're a minority, you're underrepresented, and we start that, and then nothing else happens, now you've activated me and my colleagues. They're looking at me as the resident minority, and you've actually made things more uncomfortable and more dangerous for me by not fully investing in it and having a plan.
Okay. And how do you break through the resistance of addressing topics of exclusion at the workplace when especially leaders don't appear to even acknowledge that there is a problem?
So that is incredibly common, which is why the racial uprisings in 2020 were such a sort of monumental shift in the work, because everyone saw around the world at the same time why this work might be important, right? So the issue around resistance, it's normal. Any kind of organizational change is going to create resistance. And so what do we do with that? We need to understand what the resistance is, because 9 times out of 10, the resistance is based in things and assumptions that are not actually true. So we need to
Mm-hmm.
understand. So anytime you engage in diversity training, any kind of initiative, or trying to move the organization towards inclusion, there needs to be a really amazing communication process about that. People need to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, what it means, what is the commitment. Like, you need to prove to people that this is well thought out, and it's not a random, oh, well, we're just going to have a training because everybody else is. We need to know why it's important to the organization's mission that we get this right, that we prioritize this. So the more people understand the landscape, the harder it is to resist. And then with specific resistances, it tends to be, again, around things that I don't know, things that I don't understand. And so you want to be able to debunk what those, what are those things that people are afraid of. There's always something people are afraid of losing. There's something they're afraid of changing within the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to assure people that diversity work is not just for the underrepresented people. If you do diversity work well, it makes the culture better for everyone. So everyone needs to know that this is not for one small group of people here. This is for all of us. And if we optimize our culture for inclusion, then our organization will thrive. When people show up to come and work here, or people show up to be our clients, and they have diverse identities that we don't even know and understand yet. If you're optimized for inclusion, then anyone can walk through the door and feel like they're safe, like they're welcomed, like they can bring their best selves and their work, and they can really help, change the organization and drive you forward. So getting it out of that box of, oh, that's for the special people in the, no, it's not, it's for you. And here's what we expect you to do in being part of that.
Mm-hmm. It's quite a challenge, isn't it? But there are so many opportunities when you do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Dr. Jana, you bring so much energy with you, which shows me it's possible. It is possible to do it right.
It is. It
So,
can. It's about doing it well. I don't think there's a right way, because
mm,
every single diversity initiative is as unique as the culture that it's happening in. There's
mhm,
no right way, but there is doing it well. There is being
mhm,
thoughtful. Like with every other aspect of our businesses, we've got plans, we've got strategies, we've got goals, we've got all kinds of things to help make sure that we're accountable and that we're moving, along the right path. And that if something goes wrong, we know how to, we check it early and we correct it. For some
mhm,
reason, people aren't treating diversity in that way, and they actually absolutely should treat it scientifically and have measurements and have goals and know when they're getting there and know when they're not.
mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. Treat it scientifically. Okay. Let's move a bit away from the organization and go to the individual who's affected by microaggression. So, how can you help others understand what you are going through on a day-to-day basis, no matter what your challenge is as a minority?
Yeah. So as an individual, the first thing is you have to understand that it's not your responsibility to make everyone know all the time what you're going through, because if we're always explaining what we're going through, we're not going to have enough energy to do our work at that point. So it's
Mhm,
exhausting. So starting with the people that you trust, and starting with the people that you know, again, if you're the only person that's advocating for yourself, that's just such a big job. So if
mhm,
you have trusted, like there are people hopefully in your organization who you can talk to, who you have lunch with, who might be willing to be allies and speak up for you when your voice feels small. If you have the courage and you feel safe enough to speak up for yourself, I would start by doing it in individual contexts, because the more people who are around when you're vulnerable like that, the more exposed you are. It can be really scary. So,
mhm,
who needs to know? And I would say choose those moments wisely. If you're in a training and we're talking about it and you feel like sharing your reality at this moment will help everyone in the room, and you feel like you're safe to do that, then it's great, because one of the most effective ways that we can get people to understand is by letting them know, no, these people who you work with every day, like we're having an experience that's very different from yours. Sometimes if we never share that, and if we don't have an appropriate place to do that, they never know. And so they're just like, what are you talking about? Working here is great. Well, not if you're me. And so it just depends on your level of comfort speaking. And then I would, if you're really feeling that way, I would hope that you feel safe enough to say something to, to your supervisor or human resources or whoever that person is. And then, I mean, again, your safety comes first, because in some situations it doesn't feel safe to say something to your supervisor or human resources because you think you'll get fired or you'll get labeled as problematic. So you just have to judge that really wisely. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, when you choose to speak up, if you feel like you're in an unsafe or unsupported environment, then you need to be prepared for the worst case scenario, which is potentially to lose your job. And I know everybody in this community is in different places, and so the rules are different. But sometimes when you speak up, it can cost you as much as your job. So choose wisely.
Okay. Let me at that point read a question from the audience to you, which is very fitting to what you just said. So, how may I ask for more challenging work effectively yet tactfully and stop being assigned to work that is too easy for me?
I think
That's
that
actually,
is, huh?
go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, that's another conversation. I think, again, we've got to be so careful with our words, right? There's a negotiation tactic, and there's like an Aikido philosophy. When you are in a situation where you feel like conflict is, imminent, you actually want to use that energy and you want to shift the person around and be facing in the same direction as them. So the first thing is to get your goals and priorities aligned with the person who's making the assignments, and make sure that they know that your goals are the same as theirs, that you want to get things done, that you want to deliver excellence, that you want to help the organization, and that you want to improve anything that that is deficient. And so I would ask for feedback on the work that you're doing. So, hey, I just finished up this project for you. I'd like to, get your feedback on the performance that I did, because if it's really too easy for you, then you should be doing a really great job, and they shouldn't be afraid to tell you that you're doing a really great job. So seek feedback on what you're doing. And then in that conversation, that's a great moment to say, okay, well, really glad that you loved it. I worked really hard on it. I just want to let you know that was pretty easy for me. And while I'm okay doing work that's easy, I would love to be challenged, because I think I have so much more to offer. Put them in a position to tell you, no, we don't want to give you any more work. Because if that's the case, there many times the answer to the questions that people ask me about diversity is, you need to go somewhere else. Like if you speak up for yourself and you make it known, and you get, I don't care that you're smart, capable, and that you want to help the company make more money, or whatever it is that we do, make the world a better place. You just sit down and keep doing that easy work. See you later. Then that might not be the environment for you. So again, be prepared for that to be a possible reality. But in the meantime, let them know, here's my work. It's great. I would love to have more. Because in most situations, employers like, what? I would love for my team to come and say, give me more work that's harder, please. So take the chance, and then be prepared to look for more challenging work. The other thing would be to identify those opportunities. If you see more challenging things laying around that you're not getting, then be proactive and advocate for yourself, and ask, is there any way I could be on this? And if I can't, can you tell me why not, and help me make a path so that I can start to get this kind of work.
I think that really sounds good. Yeah. That question actually has a second part to it. How may I ensure that people will never undermine my potential and talents ever again, so that I can attract suitable opportunities?
I mean, you can't because we cannot control other people, right? So you're going to probably I come across people who undermine my talents and abilities all the time, and I'm prepared to walk away from them. So if you set for yourself a set of standards that says, I will not allow people to devalue me, then you've just got to be prepared for supporting that reality for yourself. So if somebody is devaluing you and you're not going to allow that, and you don't want to be in that position, then you need to be prepared to say something when it happens, if that's appropriate, right? Do whatever it is that's appropriate and safe for you to do. And if they continue to do that, and that's an agreement that you've made with yourself, The 4 Agreements is a great book, Don Miguel Ruiz, I highly recommend it. But if you've made an agreement with yourself that says, I will never be devalued again, then you need to be prepared to walk out the door, because you only can be devalued to a certain extent before you're actually allowing it and endorsing it. And I understand sometimes economically you have to be somewhere, whatever, but even if you have to make an 18-month plan before you can liberate yourself from that situation, if the agreement is I will not be devalued and this environment refuses to value me, then be prepared to find another place that does value you.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful message. At that point, I want to say thank you for the audience who is interacting with us so, excuse me, so eagerly. There is another question, and let me rephrase that in my own words. So it seems there is a lack of trust among the colleagues that is hindering the ability to do a person's job. Despite being helpful, excuse me, despite being helpful, knowledgeable, professional, the effort to support the team always seems to fail. If they pass the same message through the line manager, there is no issue, but that makes the job role less effective. What can that person do?
So they're struggling to navigate within the team to like be appreciated, to be effective. And how are you understanding that part about when you send it through the line manager, there is no issue? Does the line manager support, or they just say that there's no issue?
I think the line manager, like there is an acceptance from or through the line manager, and the acceptance is not with that person. So the person says the same thing as the line manager. When it comes from the line manager, there's acceptance. When it comes from that person, there's no acceptance.
Oh, interesting. That's really interesting. So it sounds like in that case, it sounds like the team itself is in need of like some team building, some trust building, like there's some breakdown there. And it might be useful to, and this is where allyship becomes so important. There's so much of this work that people who are feeling like they're being pushed down can't do on their own. We can only do but so much before people in power or the system and the structure has to join us in the chorus. And so it sounds like if you're able to provide this guidance, this wisdom that is accepted by the line manager, it sounds like the line manager might need to be the ally that that empowers you and that speaks up for you and positions you to be a little bit more trusted or more taken seriously by the colleagues. It's almost like you need an endorsement, like a sponsor or a mentor in that person. So I'd go to that person and say, this happens all the time and it's costing us efficiency, right? It's costing us time, it's costing us deliverables. And so I'd love it if you could help me be taken a little bit more seriously by the team, because things like that are so individual to the culture. I'd see what that line manager had to say, because again, at the end of the day, you can't change the team. And if they're just not trusting and they're not there, bringing them along is a big piece of work that's not your job. So I would go with the more effective upline strategy.
Yeah. And maybe that's already the end of it, right? Maybe the line manager says one thing at a time, and then it's okay. Maybe you just have to address it once.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If you find yourself to be a frequent target of microaggressions, what kind of self-care practices can you recommend to build the necessary resilience to pursue the career path of your choice?
Honestly, it's the same self-care that I recommend for all humans trying to be human in this day and age, because we're all suffering. We're all going through it. It doesn't matter how senior you are, how much money you have, what country you are in, what skin you have. We're all hurting, and we all need to be taking good care of ourselves. So, the specific kind of hurt that you're experiencing, like we're all got different flavors. But I would say specifically around the microaggressions, I would say having things like affirmations handy. Whenever someone is engaging in a subtle act of exclusion, they're eroding at your self-esteem, they're eroding at your identity, they're threatening your identity. So a very strong sense of self. You've got to know in this day and age, you have to know who you are. So do meditation practices that get you to your quiet center, do affirmations that speak to, how capable you are, how strong you are, how beautiful you are, how intelligent you are, right? So reinforce the positive messages so that you can push those away. And actually here comes the 4 agreements again. That book is coming up today. That things like that help you to recognize that it's not, even though we are all unconsciously biased and in some cases overtly biased, it's not an excuse, right? It is a fact, but it's not an excuse. So you shouldn't feel that you have to be burdened by people's aggressions. However, the reality of other people's opinions and other people's aggressions is that it really has no bearing on who you are. It doesn't change who you are. It doesn't define who you are. It doesn't take anything away from you except the mental and emotional real estate that you give it. So we have to learn how to, just like a therapist, after every session, they have to cleanse, right? They have to take all of that drama and trauma that has flown through them, that they've processed and helped share space and create space with people. And they've got to move that aside and come back to the next person fresh and go to their family fresh. So you might want to engage in some energy, like healing practices that just, you can visualize yourself in a waterfall and just let everything from the day, every microaggression just wash off of you and go down the drain. So clearing exercises, and then anything that just reinforces to you who you are. Also, like, the massages, walks in the park, whatever restores your energy, fills your cup, going to the water, or taking a hot bath, and surround yourself with people who do lift you up. So I think there is a self-care component of really taking an inventory of your friends and your family and the people who love you, who make you, who remind you who you actually are in the face of the world telling you other messages that are not true.
I can totally relate to that. Like when I feel down, I have to talk to people who love me, and that's a big game changer for me. Yeah, so I'm sure there are many who would like to do more to help support their coworkers, but are afraid of saying the wrong thing or phrasing it the wrong way. And often it occurs to us only in hindsight what could have been a thing to say. Maybe it's also that we kind of lack the practice to have those conversations, to address those things. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we aren't given the skills to do this. We don't know how to do this. We don't know how to talk about, race and difference and all of these things. We've been taught not to talk about them, actually, which is even worse. So, anytime that you find yourself in a safe container where you can talk about these things, like, accept the practice. So lean in. So lean into the opportunities that you have to have these discussions. If you have the blessing of having friends and people who associates, people who go to your church, whatever it is, who are different from you, without without jumping on them like a little dog. If you actually have these relationships, or you can cultivate them slowly, take those opportunities to learn how to speak more fluently about these challenging subjects, in spaces that are safe. And then when it comes to being there for your friends, for your colleagues, for people on the street, it's always best if you can leverage the relationship, if there's already some kind of connection, if you work on a team together, if you've been talking to them and checking in on them. So my first book is Overcoming Bias, Building Authentic Relationships Across Differences. Authentic relationships matter, because it's not weird when we have a relationship if you say, Tiffany, how can I support you? I just saw that thing that happened. But because we have to normalize being there for each other, then I just invite you to have the courage. I would not do it in front of people, because it gets, it just puts a spotlight on us when you call it out. There are situations where you have to think about who's in the room. Like in some situations, speaking up in the meeting after Catherine gets called to go get the coffee, then Johan just says, you know what, I'll get the coffee, because Johan recognized that that was a microaggression and says, I'm a dude and I'm gonna go get the coffee because that was not okay. Those instances are great. But if you're uncomfortable, then try to have that conversation privately. I love like Zoom, because when something happens on a Zoom, I can private message that person and say, hey, are you okay? I know that what they said might have hurt. I've got your back, whatever, right? You can privately message. So I would say, to the extent that you can, let them know that, if they need anything, you're there. If you saw something or you experienced something that you felt like was a subtle act of exclusion, don't be afraid to privately acknowledge it to that person, because sometimes we feel crazy. Sometimes we're like, wait, did that person just say, is that what they just said? And if nobody says anything, then it becomes one of the 1,000 tiny cuts that we just feel. So say something to them privately and acknowledge. I don't know if that if what that person said was offensive, but if it was, I'm sorry. Even if you didn't say it, say I'm sorry.
Yeah. 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 Sorry is a powerful word. I mean, not to underestimate. Here's another question from the audience, which already shows a great level of reflection. That person is asking, if you catch yourself saying something that has harmed a colleague, how do you activate empathy and make amends convincingly?
Yeah. So how to make amends convincingly, was that the last word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So you can't fake it. Don't even try to fake it, because when you fake it, we feel it. So the first thing is to, just get really clear with the fact that you did something wrong, and just swallow that, just process it. Like, I have made a mistake. And then move as quickly as you can from it being about you to it being about the person who's been hurt. Because what we do, especially those of us who are trying to be good people, is we're like, oh my gosh, I'm such a horrible person. I can't believe I said that. What was I thinking? La, 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 in our heads. Meanwhile, you have someone over here who is emotionally harmed. And if you know anything about emotional pain, in your brain, it lights up the same way as if you cut my hand with a knife.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional pain hurts as much as physical pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, and probably a lot more, because it stays longer, right? Then the physical wound heals and the emotional pain sticks there.
Yeah.
So get out of your head. Stop making it about you. Once you've acknowledged you made a mistake, you can go think about it later. Now you need to go to that person and you need to say, I'm really sorry. I wasn't thinking. And, I'm going to try to do better. You want to use as few words as possible. Don't make 1,000 excuses for yourself. Ask them if there's anything that you can do and let them know that you're sorry. So the biggest thing is getting yourself out of your own way and making it about that person and being there for them. And you don't want to, where I see people go too far is with the pronouns. So some people know I use they, them pronouns, and then, I'm not offended by she, he pronouns. It's all fine. But when they use what they consider to be the wrong pronoun, then they go, oh my God, I'm so sorry, blah, blah. And they do a whole big speech, which now puts a big spotlight on me and on them and on the situation, and everyone's embarrassed. Don't do that. Fewer words, get to the point, apologize, ask if there's anything else you can do, and then get out of there and go do your reflection on what kind of a person you want to be privately.
Mm-hmm. I guess it shows like how insecure people are, and how nervous they are to make mistakes. And there you're coming in as a coach saying, hey, relax, it's okay. Breathe, continue, it's fine. Yeah. Okay. We were shortly talking about this in the beginning, and actually now I want to ask you about like a personal story, if you don't mind sharing one. Did you recently have a teachable moment, like a moment when you realized that an unconscious bias led you to wrong assumption? Maybe a situation where you feel that you hurt somebody.
So I have two, and I'm trying to decide which one is the better one.
You can share
So,
both.
okay, I'll share both. So the most recent one was, like, I have a background in acting and theater, and I'm clearly an animated person, right? So big personality all over the place. And I have, I did children's theater for a long time. I did voiceover work. So I have like characters that reside in me. And if I'm in a conversation with a group of people or one person, I might just, a character can come out. And these characters have been developed over time. Some of them came from characters I played. Some of them just come from observing people in the world. Well, one of them is like, I have an Indian accent that's just been in there. I happen to have all kinds of reverence and respect for Indian culture. And at some point, I can't remember what it was that I was talking about or saying, but I dropped into an Indian accent in front of my 14-year-old daughter at home. Like, that's where I spend most of my time right now. And my daughter looked at me and she's like, Mom, you can't do that. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? What? And I did first, didn't realize I had done it. Second, she's like, this is 2022 and you can't just put on somebody's, and I'm like, oh, but I'm an actor. And she's like, no, but you can't do that. And I'm like, oh. And it actually came up with a client that said somebody had done that in a talk that the client was going to show. And they asked me what was my opinion. And I was like, well, if the 14-year-old knows that it's
Mm-hmm.
inappropriate to just put on an accent that doesn't belong to you, and it's not a theatrical production, that it's inappropriate and that it can be seen as hurtful. And so I was just so grateful in that moment. Like, no one was hurt in that moment, but it's not an appropriate thing to do, right? And it all depends on context. Of course, my intent wasn't bad. The person in the video's intent wasn't bad, but we are being asked as people around the world to be a little bit more thoughtful about how we show up and how we, how we speak and communicate with each other, to each other, and about each other, right? Which is something we have to do. The other one was, I was doing a Zoom, and this was last year. It's like end of last year. And again, I was just doing a talk, some accent came out, and I was doing an example of some things, and somebody private chatted me and said, "Hi, I noticed that you had put on, when you did that example, you put on an accent, and it was a Southern accent. I'm from Texas. I live in Virginia. I consider myself kind of Southern. You put on a Southern accent, and the example that you were doing, the person was like stupid. They were doing something wrong. They were the stupid one. And so it triggered me because I have a Southern accent, or a lot of my family have Southern accents, and people always they devalue our intelligence, and they make assumptions about our intelligence because of the accent. And I'm like, I'm horrified. I'm a diversity expert doing a talk probably on diversity. I have, in front of 100 people, dropped into an accent doing a character just trying to be animated, and somebody was affected by my choice. It wasn't intentional. And so before the program ended, I stopped everything and I shared it with everyone. I said, listen, y'all were here, did a little thing, gave this example, and someone very graciously called me in privately and told me that what I did was harmful. I apologize to that person and to anyone else who was offended. It was not my intent, but it doesn't matter because the impact was hurtful, and I'm sorry. So, like, we're all going to do it. We do it all the time. I think in that talk earlier, I had told them that I do it, and then I got the opportunity to show them that I did it, and then show them how to make a better choice. Full circle.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing this personal story. I find it really eye-opening and also kind of encouraging, to be honest, because as you said, we are not immune to making mistakes. We are human, and not even an awareness artist is immune to make those mistakes. So yeah, for one thing, we probably shouldn't be too hard on ourselves, and for another thing, we should never give up learning and doing better and being aware. Yeah.
I mean, that's it. I wish I could say, oh, if you read my books, then you'll never have to do any more work and you'll be fixed. I can't. We're in a season where it's so hard because we're all so tired. We're doing so much. The world is going through so many things that just feel heavy and unbearable. And on top of that, we're saying, oh, you can't just let anything fly out of your mouth. You can't just do and say anything and think that it's not going to hurt anyone. We're saying that in order to be the best versions of ourselves, and I'm grateful to have like a spiritual orientation where I can say, I want to leave the world better than I found it. I feel like I'm here to reflect humanity back at itself in a good way. And so that comes with a responsibility to try. So the work is never going to be over. My 14-year-old is going to be teaching me new things when I'm 99. And I'm going to say, thank you, sweetie. I'm not always going to get it right, but I'm going to try.
Dr. Jana, I learned so much today, and I love your energy. It was a great talk. Hey, speaking of your book, I want to recommend reading Subtle Acts of Exclusion by Dr. Tiffany Jana and by Michael Baran. The summary of which our audience may find in the getAbstract library. So check out the book. It's really, really great stuff. And Dr. Jana, it was so great having you here today. Thank you so much for making time. Time flew by, basically. So we are already at the end of our session. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. And thank you everyone in the audience. Thank you for your amazing questions and your participation. And please, please, please have grace for yourself. because it's hard work and we're going to mess up, but it's okay. And then have grace for other people when they mess up, because you might be the one on the receiving end, but maybe next time it's going to be you. So grace for yourself and grace for others.
Same from my end. Thank you to our audience for joining. For more relevant content on the topic, check out the channels in our library, which are diversity and inclusion, corporate culture, discrimination, and so on and so on. There is a lot of good content out there, and you will receive the recording of the session in the next day. So the author's contact is Tiffany at tmiconsultinginc.com. And the contact of getAbstract is corporate@getAbstract.com. So I'm wishing you all a great day. I'm looking forward to hearing from you again, and I say goodbye.